Hello, this is a summary of my presentation about the Bahá'í Faith, a modern religious movement that was created about 150 years ago. This presentation was delivered at the annual conference of the Association for Bahá'í Studies North America in August of 2014 in Toronto, Canada. The Bahá'í Faith was conceived in the second half of the 19th century in what is now Iran by the so-called twin prophets, who are better known under their religious names of the Bab, Gate in Arabic, and Baha'u'llah, Glory of God. To compare the Bahá'í Faith with modernity, first we have to define modernity. In my presentation, I define and discuss modernity in the context of my theory of religious cycles. Unlike many other scholarly theories of religion, my theory does not aim to discover the origin of religion. It does not intend to reduce religion to other forms of social activity. My approach could be characterized as phenomenology of religion. It focuses on the evolutionary development of religious systems and traces their similarities. It views religion primarily as a semantic system, whose claims cannot be objectively and directly verified by experiment. Religion is a semantic system that creates a net of meanings, whose origin is not available to ordinary humans. Inasmuch as religion generates a semantic field, its most important task is to preserve the original teachings and to transmit them to the next generations. In order to accomplish this, religions create sacred scriptures and sacred traditions. Both sacred scriptures and sacred traditions constitute a backbone of any historical religion. In the course of its evolution, religious systems go through a certain number of phases or stages. Based on the interrelation between scripture and tradition, I distinguish 6 such stages: early or formative, orthodox, classical, reformist, critical, and post-critical. For example, in Christianity, the early church represents the formative phase. Orthodoxy and Catholicism stand for the Orthodox and Classical phases, respectively. The Protestant Reformation exemplifies the Reformist phase, and so on. In the course of their evolution, religious systems undergo 2 types of crises: structural and systemic. Structural crises challenge sacred tradition and are usually resolved by the appearance of new branches within the already existing religions. Systemic crises of religion question the foundation of the system itself, namely its sacred scriptures. They are resolved by the introduction of new religious systems in the midst of their mother faiths. According to my theory, the 18th century European Enlightenment initiated a new, critical stage of the Christian religion. European Enlightenment absolutized reason, and it was marked by skepticism toward organized religion. Unlike Protestant reformers who rebelled against sacred tradition, Enlightenment intellectuals questioned the authority of the Holy Scriptures. This tendency was expressed in the 3 main trends of the Enlightenment thought: biblical criticism, deism, and atheism, or agnosticism. Having started as a systemic crisis of Christianity, the Enlightenment extended its influence over other cultures and religions, thus initiating a global crisis of religious consciousness and spirituality. Traditional pre-modern religions respond to the challenge of modernity by rejecting and confronting it, this is what I call revival, or by accepting and adjusting to it, this is what I call renewal. The first, orthodox or conservative approach, produces religious isolationism and fundamentalism. The second, liberal approach, fosters religious openness and promotes ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. Unlike traditional faiths, whose scriptural canons were sealed before modern times and cannot be altered, new religious movements have the advantage, even the obligation, to respond to modernity in a different way. The attraction of modern spirituality consists in taking into account the successes and failures of the project of the Enlightenment. Furthermore, simple acceptance of modernity, which is quite satisfactory for traditional religions, would be self-defeating for new religious movements, because it would mean that their God is no smarter than Thomas Jefferson. The validity and potentials of new religious movements depend on their re-evaluation of modernity and their ability to produce revelations that supplement and enhance the accomplishments of human reason. Culture, from the word cult, originates in religion and entails a set of beliefs that operate from within the individual. Civilization, in its turn, consists of rules that regulate the external behavior of individuals in society. Since the inner and the outer are intimately connected, culture and civilization are also interrelated, and one culture can produce a number of different civilizations. Christianity, for instance, gave rise to medieval, Renaissance, and modern types of society. From this point of view, it is not completely adequate to compare modernity and the Bahá'í faith. Modernity represents a specific type of civilization that developed from the Christian cultural roots, while the Bahá'í faith lays the foundation for its own distinct culture that may evolve into a variety of different civilizations in the future. Bahá'í belief in the lesser and most great peace entails a similar distinction. The lesser peace may eventually come as the culmination of the Enlightenment project, and it will consist of the external political unification of humanity on a global scale. The most great peace, in its turn, represents the ideal goal of the inner spiritualization and unity of humankind, which may involve various socio-political arrangements. Bahá'í ideology in many significant ways represents an extension of the modern worldview. Baha'is sanctify most of the principles of the Enlightenment by reaffirming them in a different religious context. These principles include freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, freedom of association, rule of law, equality of men and women, importance of scientific and technological progress, advancement of human rights, and so on. Bahá'í teachings also apply the modern concept of limitation of power to the organizational structure of religion. The Bahá'í administrative order is built on the separation between interpretation, administration, and worship, and follows in its proceedings democratic electoral practices as well as consultative and majority voting decision-making. Some of Bahá'í key teachings are apparently incompatible with and represent a step backward from the Enlightenment worldview. These are the doctrines of infallibility, the conflation of religion and state, and the prohibition of organized dissent. These principles aim at sustaining the organizational unity of the Bahá'í religion, whose institutions are supposed to participate in government activities in the distant future. Formally speaking, religion can never be fully separate from the state, because both of those institutions serve the same purpose of human education and training in virtue. Religion exercises these functions by appealing to heavenly rewards, while the state does so by delivering earthly punishments. Historically, the principle of separation of church and state was formulated and put into practice in order to free religions from state control, and thus make them more spiritually advanced and tolerant of each other. Practically, the separation entails at least two things. First, the state should not legislate on matters of religion, and religious affiliation, or lack thereof, should not serve as a qualification for holding public office. Second, religion, while it can still have a place in public discourse, should not take part in civil legislation. The rapid deterioration of traditional morality became perhaps one of the most significant downsides of the separation of church and state. The Bahá'í Faith endorses the principle of separation as a necessary prerequisite for the successful dissemination of its teachings. It also embraces some of its most important aspects, such as the encouragement of religious tolerance and the non-use of violence and compulsion in spreading religion. Being themselves firmly separated from political affairs, Baha'is in the West, for example, are forbidden to get involved in party politics. The Bahá'í Faith envisions, however, the participation of the elected houses of justice in state governance in the distant future, with the purpose of advancing their cause through civil legislature. In my opinion, such involvement would be best served if accompanied by mutual checks and balances on the part of both religion and state. In conclusion, although some of the features of the Bahá'í worldview may seem as a step backward from the Enlightenment project, a comprehensive comparison between the two demonstrates, in my view, the progressive nature of Bahá'í teachings. First, Bahá'í doctrines display spiritual depth, which is lacking in the Enlightenment that relies purely on reason and external social reforms. Second, Bahá'í teachings reaffirm most of the Enlightenment principles in a different religious setting, thus making them more deeply rooted in human psyche and consciousness. Third, the Bahá'í ideology takes into consideration the disproportionate development of various nations on the planet by modifying and adjusting some of the Enlightenment principles to better fit the whole of humanity. Overall, the Bahá'í Faith represents a religious tradition which is neither anti-modern, nor simply modern or even postmodern, but instead truly post-modern, in the sense that it regards the Enlightenment as a ski jump for its own development that will eventually supersede it. Such a position with regard to modernity in general and the Enlightenment in particular gives the Bahá'í Faith a unique attraction and advantage over the old and more recent religious movements, an advantage that, if properly understood and appreciated, would reveal its high long-term potentials. Thank you for listening.